1,000 years. That's a long time. And when we think about the Middle Ages, we often picture this dark, kind of distant era. But here's the thing. It was anything but empty. This was a time of epic collapse, for sure, but also of incredible creation. A time when the world we live in today was literally hammered into shape, piece by painful piece. So that leads us to the big question we're tackling today. How in the world did we get from the smoking ruins of the Roman Empire to the dawn of the world we'd recognize? How was a completely new civilization built, from the wreckage of the old one? Because this is the crucial point you gotta remember. The Middle Ages weren't just an ending. Nope. They were a beginning. A really messy, often violent, but incredibly creative period where the very idea of Europe was forged into existence. So our story has to start in Act 1, the Fall. This is all about what happened when the greatest empire the West had ever seen came apart at the seams. It wasn't like a switch was flipped one day. It was this long, slow-motion collapse. First, the empire literally splits in two. Then, the unthinkable happens. Barbarian tribes actually sacked the city of Rome itself. And finally, in 476, the last emperor in the West, just a kid really, is quietly kicked off the throne. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire was gone. And this right here shows us something absolutely critical. When the empire split, it wasn't a division of equals, not even close. On one hand, you had the West, mostly rural, pretty poor, and politically fragile. On the other, you have the East, what we call the Byzantine Empire, which was packed with cities, incredibly wealthy and stable. That contrast, that's the key to understanding why one half crumbled while the other kept going for another 1,000 years. And you can't overstate what was lost here. Imagine a world where all the highways fall apart, the economy basically evaporates, and most people just forget how to read. The great cities, they emptied out. That peace and security that defined the Roman world for centuries, that was a distant memory. This is the reality behind the whole Dark Ages idea. But out of all this chaos, a new recipe for civilization started to come together. It had three main ingredients. You had the leftover culture of the Romans, you had the unifying faith of the Christians, and you had the raw warrior energy of the Germanic tribes, the so-called barbarians. The way these three groups mixed, clashed, and eventually merged, that would define the next 1,000 years. Which brings us to Act 2, the rise. Because after the fall, what comes next? It's the long, slow, and really difficult story of how people started picking up the pieces and building something completely new. And the first great figure to really step out of the chaos was this guy, Charlemagne. Think about this scene. It's Christmas Day, 800 CE, and the Pope crowns him Emperor of the Romans. He was the first person to hold that title in the West in over 300 years. For just a brief, shining moment, it looked like the glory of Rome was actually back. Now, Charlemagne's empire itself, it didn't last, but his ideas, they were a total game changer. He kicked off a revival of learning, he spread new political structures across Europe, and maybe most importantly, he planted this powerful idea of a single, unified Christian West, a concept called Christendom. His reign really did form the bedrock of what was to come. But like so many great empires, this one didn't outlive him by much. His grandsons fought over it, and as you can see here, they split it into three pieces. And right here in the year 843, you can literally see the faint outlines of the modern map of Europe starting to take shape. West Francia becomes France, East Francia becomes the heart of what will one day be Germany. But these brand new kingdoms were immediately in for a world of hurt. A whole new wave of invasions crashed down on them from every direction. You had Vikings raiding from the north, you had Magyar horsemen plundering from the east, and you had Muslim pirates attacking from the south. It was chaos all over again. Which brings up a really fundamental problem, doesn't it? When your kings are too weak to protect you and there's no central government to speak of, how do you create any kind of order? How do you even rule? Well, the answer they came up with wasn't a system of laws, but a system built entirely on personal loyalty, feudalism. And the heart of it was this thing called vassalage. Basically, a warrior, a vassal, would swear a personal oath to a more powerful lord. In exchange for his military service, he'd get land and protection. This created this whole pyramid of power, where everybody was tied by personal obligation to someone above them. Power wasn't public, it was personal. And then, right around the year 1000, it's like Europe could finally catch its breath. The invasions pretty much stopped, the climate got a bit warmer, and new farming tech led to a huge food surplus, which in turn led to a population explosion. And with more people, what do you get? Well, cities and long-distance trade came roaring back to life. This period, this was the High Middle Ages. And while all this was happening, another major player was rising on the board: the Catholic Church. It transformed from just a loose network of priests into this powerful, centralized institution, a true papal monarchy. The Pope wasn't just a religious leader anymore. He was a power player, going toe-to-toe with kings and emperors for influence. And this all sets the stage for our final act, the rebirth. Now, this is the really wild part of the story. It's about how a century of absolute disaster didn't actually destroy Europe, but instead shattered the old medieval world and, weirdly enough, paved the way for our own. And the crisis kicks off with this single, horrifying number. In 1347, the Black Death hit Europe, and within just a few years, it killed at least 1/3 of the entire population. Just gone. It's a catastrophe on a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. But out of this unimaginable horror came something that nobody expected. Think about it. With so many people dead, there was suddenly a massive labor shortage. And for the first time ever, the peasants who survived actually had some bargaining power. They started demanding better pay, more freedom. And when the old lords said no, they revolted. The very foundations of the whole feudal system started to crack. And right into this fractured, changing world, you get this wave of transformative innovations. The printing press, it let new ideas spread like wildfire. Gunpowder made the armored knight on his horse and the big stone castle totally obsolete. The Renaissance brought back classical knowledge and a whole new way of looking at the world. And all the while, powerful kings were busy consolidating their power, creating the very first sovereign states. And what's really interesting is that this process didn't happen everywhere at once. In places like England and France, you see these strong, centralized kingdoms emerge, basically the blueprint for the modern nation-state. But in other places, like the Holy Roman Empire, power stayed fragmented into this mosaic of little principalities for centuries to come. So where do we draw the line? When does the medieval world really end? Well, historians usually point to a few huge moments around this time. In 1453, Constantinople, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, finally fell. Then, in 1492, of course, Columbus sails west. These events signaled this profound shift. Europe's focus was turning from itself outward to the rest of the globe. And that really leaves us with one last thought, doesn't it? The medieval world was born from the collapse of one world, and it ended with the discovery of a new one. It really makes you stop and think, what great collapse or what great discovery is defining our time? What are people going to say our era was all about in 1,000 years?